Bonsoir, good evening. Thank you for joining. Welcome to the Alliance Française of Washington, D.C. My name is Natasha Zavadska, and I'm in charge of the cultural events at the Alliance. Today, we are very happy to have Julie Scolnik with us. She will talk about her recently published memoir, Paris Blue. Julie, my first question, and to start and to introduce your story to those of you who maybe haven't read the book yet, can you bring us to the point of departure of your story to the 1976 Paris?
I was 20 years old and I had just arrived in Paris to take humanities courses through my junior year abroad with my American college, and also to study the flute with a very famous flutist. And of course, it was a dream for a 20-year-old girl who had never lived in any big city before to suddenly find herself in this beautiful, poetic city. I loved it. It was beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And then by November, when the sun started to stay hidden behind the clouds every day, I started to get very lonely and isolated. And you have to remember, this is decades before the internet or cell phones or any kind of connection for a young person who couldn't really contact her friends or family or anybody, really. The only way we could ever find a friend is to jump on a bus and hope that maybe they'd be home. So we all felt a bit isolated. And so I decided to search for a chorus to join, because I thought that would nourish me and give me what I needed for connection. So I joined the best chorus in the entire world. It was conducted by a famous musician, Daniel Barenboim. And this is where the beginning of the story takes place, because from my seat in the soprano section, I saw a man across the 200 voices in the bass section, and it was as if a camera pan. This might be a moment that I could read, actually. I decided to find a couple of places since you asked me if there was anything. So I'm in the chorus, and I'm so happy to be singing with people who love music, and it made me excited to be in Paris again. But here's just a paragraph or two. On Thursday night, I returned to the chorus. I was enjoying the music when I was startled by a face on the other side of the semicircle. It was as if a movie camera, panning casually across a sea of faces, stopped and focused on just one, a young, strikingly handsome man around 30 years old, sitting at the end of the second row of basses, and the camera wouldn't move. It was a sensitive face, radiating quiet intelligence. My fascination was less about his looks, however, than about his solemn demeanor, which stood out radically from the bellowing men surrounding him. I couldn't look away. At the end of the rehearsal, he disengaged himself quickly and was out the door before most people had put on their coats. And then I just want to mention that 3 weeks later, we sang our first concert, and I saw him up close for the first time. And this is where the love at first sight thing is kind of explained in my book. People who don't believe in it, I just would like to say that it's a thing. When the concert was over, tremendous applause brought the soloists and Barenboim back on stage for curtain calls. It surprised me that the chorus left the stage just as chaotically as members of the orchestra. Everyone was squeezing through the crowded hallways, some members lining up in the stairwells, others streaming into elevators to return to the underground levels to grab their coats. Suddenly, my handsome bass was brushing right past me. His face was just inches from mine, but he didn't see me, intent as he was on making his way through the crowd. It was the first time I had ever seen him up close, and the effect was no less potent than if I had just imbibed a mythical love potion. I just want to say, when I got back, I was hoping, so I climbed the stairs. So I watched his tall figure head for the staircase to leave. So I said an abrupt goodbye to a friend and hurried to the exit too. By the time I started climbing the stairs, he had just made the turn at the landing in the opposite direction. I was hoping that he too would exit at level -1 to take the metro home. But when I opened the stage door to the concourse, he was gone. I headed toward the metro in my tweed cape, my white alpaca scarf loosely around my neck without freeing my hair. After the 20-minute metro ride, I sauntered home more slowly than usual. I let myself into the apartment with my unwieldy iron key, walked silently down the hallway to my room, and stood in front of the antique mirror over the mantel without removing my coat. What did I look like to that stranger on the stairs? My cheeks were rosy and my eyes glassy from the cold walk home. For once, I didn't turn on the radio. It was too much of a distraction. Instead, I washed up and undressed slowly, crawled in between the sheets of my low, narrow bed, and went to sleep with the image of his face in my dreams. It was inside me somehow, like a phrase of music so beautiful, I knew I would need to hear it again, or a painting that stayed with me without my knowing why. The reason I wanted to read that is that this is where everything changed at that stage in my life, because it was so concrete. It was such an obsession with this person whom I had not met yet, that when I got back to the chorus in January, I was determined that I would speak to him. And what happens in the next part one of this book is the courtship, and how we met and how he started to drive me back from rehearsals and how we bonded over the music that we were singing in this chorus. And like you said in your little introduction, it was a combination of three very powerful things. It was sharing music in a very profound way, sitting on the stage next to each other while we sang Beethoven's Ninth, and knowing that we were feeling the exact same thing. And then he was writing me letters, so it was the poetry of his writing, and then it was in the most beautiful city of the world that we were seeing each other in parks and cafes because he needed to learn English. So those three things were like the stars that aligned, that made this an impossible love to avoid. I should add to the listeners who haven't read this yet, is that he was a married man with a child, but he was separated from his wife. And as a 20-year-old girl, I was rather convinced that he was not really attached. So that's the structure of part one of this story.
Thank you, Julie. My next question is, I think a lot of people were asking it themselves while reading your book. You describe everything in such great detail. How were you able to remember entire conversations, actually, from what, more than 45 years ago?
I'm happy you asked that. So what happened, and just for those of you who do not know, this story is not just about first love and this man I met in Paris, but actually follows me on the next 30 years of my life, beginning with, after the romance, the heartbreak of the romance. And after the heartbreak, I moved back to Boston, ready to start my life again, which was very different from what I thought it was going to be, moving to Paris. And during that fall of 1978, 2 years after that, I tried to start my career as a flutist, but I couldn't do anything until I had emptied the archives of my heart. So at age 22, I sat in a park, and I sat by the Charles River, and in longhand, I just started scribbling down every memory I had from the 18 months prior to that, meaning how I met him, every conversation, every outfit that I wore, the audition to get into the chorus. I remembered everything in the utmost detail, even though I had not kept a journal during that whole era. I just had it. It was as if it was just indelibly imprinted on my memory. And so everyone says, how did you remember? I didn't write this book just now. I wrote that part more than 40 years ago. And then I put it away for at least 10 years. And every 10 or 15 years, and maybe 5 years, I would take it out. The first step was entering it all into my laptop when I learned how to use a computer, which was no easy feat for me. And then I put it away again, and I kept adding more and more material to it. And about 20 years ago, I know this is why people say, what do you mean this story has been lingering in your psyche for 40 years, more than 40 years? Well, about 20 years ago, I tried to send it out, but it really wasn't good enough yet. And I had not yet read a book about about what memoir is. And I had added too much other stuff about my life. my children, what they were like, all my boyfriends before I met my current husband, my only husband, my wonderful present husband. I wrote about, there was just too much stuff. Then I read a book that taught me that a memoir is about one thing, and it's a universal truth as illustrated by a personal story. And then I understood. So I cut 100 pages, restructured it. At one point, one of the agents said, I love this story, but can you make it into a novel? So I turned the entire book into a work of fiction, and I made it into a novel. But it was a very bad idea because it really wasn't fiction. It was just a thinly disguised memoir. So I had sent it out in that form, and then she didn't like it anymore. And then I got discouraged and I put it away for another 10 years. Then I read the book on memoir. Then I cut 100 pages and I restructured it. And in the meantime, my earlier title had been Lilies That Fester, from a Shakespeare sonnet, number 94. And I liked that title until I had a better title and I understood what my point was. Because as you know, it's not enough to have a good story. And I knew a good story, but a story has to have a point to make, and it has to have this universal truth. And then I had a title, which was A Certain Shade of Blue. But then all the 50 Shades of Grey books and movies came out, and I knew that I couldn't keep that title. And then I came up with Paris Blue, and my book had a point, and the title had meaning, and I had found my truth. And that's when the book came together. Then around 3 years ago, I decided to really whip it into shape. It was the last thing I did before I died. And I had a fresh pair of eyes and a kind of a manuscript consultant who worked on it with me a little bit, because I had covered so many life events and so many flashbacks that needed some help making it polished and really intelligible. So that's how I got to where I am today.
And so, yeah, speaking of letters, each chapter of your book starts with a letter, right, from Luke. And these are actually letters from the future, right? So they make us travel between future you and present you in the book. And by the way, it's masterfully done. It doesn't feel confusing at all. It's
Thank you.
really, really a great part of the book. And the letters are beautiful. So my question is, how did you come up with this sort of arrangement for the book, right? And tell us more about the letters. I guess not all of them made it to the book. Did you translate them
I
in
did.
English, I imagine, right?
Yes, exactly. They were in minuscule French handwriting, all folded, all on crunchy airmail paper, all folded identically into the same shape. And I have a thick 2-inch envelope of those letters. These letters, the idea, I didn't have this idea at the beginning when I had sent out my book before it was good enough. And then one day it just came to me. And the reason it works so well, to those of you who don't know anything about the book, is that I used the letters that I got when he and I were separated again. So we had this romance in Paris. Then I went back to the States to finish my senior year of my American college. And that's when we sent hundreds of letters back and forth. And what I did was I started each chapter with a letter from the time of separation, but each letter kind of is a foreshadowing of what the following chapter will be about. For instance, one letter may say, "Dear Julie, a year ago, you were arriving in Paris looking for a chorus to join. I wish we could go back in time." And then the chapter that begins there is the chapter about how I'm looking for a chorus. So quickly, the reader understands that there's a discrepancy of time and place. But by doing it this way, it makes the reader wonder, when are they going to meet? And I think that contributes to the reader wanting to keep turning the pages to find out when that's going to happen. So yes, the letters, I have a lot more letters, and I use the ones that would help move the plot along, if you know what I mean.
And so Luke, this man, he broke your heart. I mean, I'm spoiling a little bit here, but at the same time, we all know that you are happily married now, and obviously you can guess how the story ended. Do you still keep the letters? Are they still important to you? I mean, obviously for the sake of sharing the story and publishing the book, but just on the personal level, do you keep the letters?
Well,
Are they important to you?
they sadly to say they were very important to me. I got rid of them a little while ago, um, because I wanted, for one thing, I didn't want there to be some kind of legal issue. I wanted um, to be able to say that not only are these translated letters, but they are paraphrased and drawn from my memory. So yes, they were very important to me. I believe that writing this book was a sort of catharsis for me. And as you remember, it was as if I wrote my own ending at, at the end of the book. What many of you who are tuned in right now may not know is that when I say that it covered 30 years, what I mean is that when it ended, it was difficult. I went through my 20s, finally met my husband when I was 30, and ended up having a very, very happy life with the most wonderful man. And many people realize that this book is really about what a happy ending this is and how that's my true love in the book. My husband likes to tease people by saying, when we're talking about this, he'll say, oh, I got 3 pages. You know, the whole book is about this other person, but he got 3 pages because this was not that story. Many readers are just very, very happy to see that I was able to move on with difficulty, because what I'm referring to is that I kept searching for answers after he broke my heart. He would come to Boston on business and we would get together for dinner or a drink. And I kept trying to get some kind of closure from that young trauma from my youth, which was buried, almost hermetically sealed in some corner of my being. And I didn't want that hurt to retreat to its nest for another 25 years. So each time I saw him, I tried to actually have a real exchange, and I never got it, which is why it was so difficult to move on. Because something like that, when you're that young, and when people say, what do you want readers to take away from this? I always say that when a first love that is extremely romantic and passionate ends suddenly and traumatically without much closure, it can take a lifetime to get over. So that's one of the takeaways. The second might be something that music and memory and poetry and love are all so completely interconnected that sometimes it's hard to separate them. And that may bring me to a good moment to talk about the music in the book, if you want, Natasha. And it might be a moment even to play, after I just give a little introduction, I might explain what I mean about the fact that this person in the chorus loved music so profoundly that it is what single-handedly connected us on the deepest level. And one day when we were, my husband's talking too loud in the kitchen. On one of the concerts, I walked onto the stage when we were about to sing Beethoven's Ninth, and there he was sitting on the edge of the bass section, indicating an empty seat next to him, so that we could sing the concert side by side. And it was the happiest moment I had had in my life up till that moment, because here we were under these bright concert lights, listening to the first 3 movements of this Beethoven symphony. I don't know if you know this music, but I think I'm going to have Natasha's going to play it, so you can appreciate what that experience might have been like. This is before he and I were involved at all, before we had confessed our love in any way. We just knew that this thing was growing, and that I was about to start teaching him English in cafes and parks. But so far, he had only started to drive me home from rehearsals. So as you know, when something is that smoldering and undemonstrative and, you know, repressed, it makes it that much more powerful. So what Natasha is going to do right now is to just play the slow movement, one of my favorite pieces in the world, the slow movement from Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, which is something that I have used for the rest of my life to listen to when I need to bring that feeling of love serum back into my body. And I just use that term because 15 years or so ago, I went through breast cancer and I had to go through chemo. And that was the piece I listened to in my iPod over and over again, because as you know, it's not fun to go through chemo and you're in a very dark place. But when I heard this music, it lifted me out of a very dark spot and reminded me of this moment where the music was so powerful. It was, it brought me to such a beautiful place. So I think it's a good place to take a pause and listen to the music.
If you don't mind, I stop here because we don't have time to listen to it in its entirety, but it's absolutely beautiful. I do appreciate that you have a whole list of music, which, as you say, almost are like characters in the book because they play such a big role. So if you haven't read the book yet, you can refer to that list and play the music while reading the book to absolutely create the atmosphere. So by now we have talked about all these three magical elements which created the story. Right? Music, which I don't think the story would have even been possible if it wasn't for music, right? You joining the chorus and you were connecting vibe through music. Then we talk about words, the power of words and poetry and the letters from Luke. And of course, the beautiful backdrop of Paris, the very romantic city. So, and then at some point in your book, right, Luke visits you in the States and sort of stripped of these elements, magic disappears. Why do you think it was so? Why do you think your story was so magical in Paris and so disastrous in the United States?
Such a good question. And as you know, I try to figure this out, even in the book. I kept, maybe it was this, maybe it was that. but it was so surprising and so shocking, and almost like a physical metamorphosis took place the moment his foot touched American soil. I think that for a man like this lawyer, for whom language and the French language was so important to him and gave him all his power, and it was his raison d'être, which, as you know, means, it was his MO, the way he operated in the world. When he was stripped of that power, he just panicked, and he couldn't relate to anything. In fact, he responded with hostility and resentment and criticism to everything around him that was American, including me. And as soon as I saw this side of him, I was done. I couldn't believe it. I mean, as you know, when he finally comes here to live for the summer, I would have left in a day. We were already staying in somebody's home, and I had to, that's all I was worrying about, making sure that we did put the key back and everything was proper. But fortunately for my mental health, and fortunately I had enough mental health to know not to put up with this, because I saw a person that I did not recognize. And after all that waiting and hoping and dreaming and crying, and I realized that all those dreams were, vanished into thin air. And this is why it was so traumatic for such a young girl who really had very little experience at that point. I really trusted him, and I believed everything he wrote. The thing is, many people, I realize now, and when I talk to some of my friends who have read the book a second time or so, they say, really all those signs were there, but I just missed them. I should have realized. But it's like you said, there were so many magical parts of it. It has a bit to do with what the title means, by the way. I don't want to give it away, but besides the fact that the blue in the title is not exactly what you would expect, it's not just that Paris evokes isolation like Picasso's blue period or other artists who use the blue color to connote separation and loneliness and isolation. Of course, there's a little bit of that Paris blue, but there's another real reason that it's called Paris blue, and I don't want to tell you because it's kind of a great moment in the book when you discover what it is. But it also becomes kind of a metaphor for what he and I did share, the poetry, the magic, the Paris scenes, but it wasn't life, and it wasn't the full spectrum of colors. So it's kind of an interesting drawing the title in that way. So I think I answered your question about why he could not operate in this country, and how
Yes.
fortunately, I mean, I'm glad I saw it, because who knows, I might have been under this illusion had I moved to Paris and never seen that side right away until much later,
Right. We actually have a great question here in the chat. So Julia, can you please talk a little bit more about Paris? I think that's why a lot of participants are actually here, right? Because we all miss the city. So can you talk a little bit more about Paris itself, and perhaps your neighborhood and the places you used to go, the cafes you met at? So yeah.
Yeah, of course. I wish I could see more than just two live faces. Bravo to you two ladies who are showing your faces. But I have to admit that I do the same thing. But if any of you wants to be brave and say hello with your real face, I would really love that. Anyway, back to Paris. Well, when I first moved there, I was living, oh, thank you. They responded, thank you. Oh, thank you, I appreciate it. I was first living in the 15th district or arrondissement. Thank you. I love seeing these faces pop up. I appreciate it. It's just really hard to talk to a little black square with a name, but this is like more like giving a talk in a room. So I lived inside an apartment of an old lady, and it was hilarious. She was just like a caricature. So I went into my little room and I shut the door, and then Luke started climbing into my room from the sidewalk because I lived on the ground floor. And then she kicked me out, and she lied and said, "You have to find another room. I need the room for my daughter." And I knew she was lying. But then I found the most perfect little maid's room. I mean, it was shabby and it cost me $25 a month. It was shabby, but it was in the most perfect neighborhood of Paris, in the 6th arrondissement. For those of you who do know Paris, a block away from Saint-Germain-des-Prés, a block away from De Magot and Café Flore. And so even though I was on the 6th floor, I walk up 5 beautiful carpeted stairs and then one narrow little staircase up to my maid's room. I shared a bathroom with an art student down the hall, and all I had was a bed under the eaves and one very shabby chest of drawers, but I filled it with flowers in Chianti bottles and museum prints on the walls. And I had my little radio, which transmitted all these live classical music concerts into my room. And when it rained, the rain was poetic, like a snare drum on the zinc roof. So I was loving this so much. Oh, I just have this tiny little part that I think you would get here, which was just, yeah, that. So even though Luke would leave me every night to go back home, even though his wife wasn't even living there, we always had just a little window of time in the afternoon. We went to rehearsals together sometime, or we saw each other at the end of his workday from, say, 5 to 7 or something like that. And I never really asked, why can't you stay? Why can't I see you more? I just knew that the next day would be either another rehearsal or meeting him in a cafe or in a park. And so, sometimes he would come over and we would do an English lesson. That was kind of our pretext for meeting. And I was introducing him to Wordsworth poetry, and one poem in particular called Tintern Abbey, which is a kind of a lyrical meditation on memory and the role of memory in our lives, which I bring back at the end of the book, and it all kind of ties it together. But so we started to do this reading, and he'd lie on his side and look over my shoulder, and I'd try to get him to pronounce these beautiful phrases of Wordsworth. And of course, it didn't last. The lesson doesn't last long because I could start to feel his warm breath in my ear. And then I'd let him get by with lots of phrases without correcting him. And he would say, so just from here, he'd say, Mademoiselle Scolnik, he said, as he kissed the back of my earlobe, "You're not finding any more words to correct?" he asked. And then he rolled me onto my back and kissed me slowly. Quote from me, "This is, of course, all in the name of learning, all part of the lesson plan," I'd say in bits and pieces when I could get enough air in between kisses. The lips must be retrained. In a lazy, lust-filled stupor, burying his face in my neck and hair, he said, "I find that your pedagogical skills are much improved, Mademoiselle Scolnik, and very effective. These must be the nouvelle méthode d'anglais, the new English lessons." An hour later, I walked Luke to the bus stop. "English lesson tomorrow, Julie," he'd say as his bus drew near. "New methods or old?" I'd ask. He smiled and hopped onto the bus, stood in the doorway and waved goodbye as it pulled away. I walked around Boulevard Saint-Germain as daylight faded and streets became animated with people heading home to their families, with briefcases and baguettes under their arms. I picked up something for dinner from a small market and wandered home slowly. I didn't mind that Luke left me alone. I felt flush with love as I climbed the 5 curving flights of stairs and one steep one to my Lilliputian living quarters at the top. Collapsing on my low bed to read Madame Bovary and listen to my radio, I felt safe and happy. I didn't care about Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Gertrude Stein, or any of the dozens of writers who had described the magic of the city. This was my Paris now.
Thank you, Julie. And so we have Carole here who says salut. And she says that she lived on Boulevard Saint-Michel from, ready, 1976 to 1977.
Oh my God.
She's asking if you used to go to Joe Alain or Mother's Earth Cafe.
Wait, where is she? I just want to see if oh, there she is. Hi, nice to meet you. Those 2 cafes, don't remember, you're muted. So if you want to speak, just unmute yourself. I listen to you.
There we go. Yes. Hi.
Hi. Were you part of the an exchange program
Yeah, I
like
was. I went to Stony Brook University in New York. And by the way, thank you, Connie, who's sitting right there. She told me to come on here.
Thank you, Connie.
Yeah, I met Connie because of a travel group called Hago and Beam Z, and we became instant friends. It was great. I just wanted you to know that. But she also lived in France almost when I did. I was part of a program from Oswego University because Stony Brook hadn't been an exchange college at that point, and I lived there for a year. I lived on Boul Mich, and then went to Sorbonne. Yeah.
That is amazing. We were
Tell
there
us-
exactly
tell
the
us-
same year.
Tell us where you hung out. Tell us what you did there.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, so my little all of our classes, this was a beautiful little building on off of Montparnasse on, it was called Rue de Chevreuse. And that's where Reed Hall was located. That's where we had all of our, we know there's somebody who seems to C.S. Smith. Did you go there too? Yes, excellent. So that's where Columbia University administered these courses for American students from Wesleyan and Smith and Columbia and many others. And that's where I had my classes. So my hangouts were all along Boulevard Montparnasse, at La Rotonde and Le Dôme. And then when I moved to my new neighborhood on Boulevard, on Rue Bonaparte, then all my new hangouts were de Magot and Café de Flore and along there. So I'm always on the left bank, of course. But
I was less fancy.
well, I mean, if you hang out where you're, going to school usually, right? Or where you're living.
But there were these American places, Joey Allen's, which is also in London. And we hung out with a lot of French people who thought they were going to be American at some time in their life, even if it were just mental.
I was a bit of a snob in that I tried to avoid hanging out with Americans, which is why I didn't go to those places. I was so pleased to be part of this chorus because it was predominantly French. And I even tried to avoid the one American girl who tried to seek me out each week to have small talk and talk about culture shock, because I felt as if I had integrated or I had worked on integrating so well into Parisian life. I didn't want to be pegged as an American, and talking to her, she blew my cover. So I didn't hang out with them. I did have a couple of friends, of course, and I needed friends. But, when you're trying to do a language immersion thing, you definitely should avoid speaking English.
Oh, we did. We hung out with French people, but I lived in an international foyer.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Nice
It's
to
great
meet
to
you.
see how many people are remembering their own days in Paris. And Betsy Gibson also says that she was on the Smith program 7980, and she knows very well Reid Hall.
Oh,
And
yeah.
in fact, it is her computer screensaver.
You're
Book-
kidding. Wait, I want to see if I can see her. Where is she? Is she there? Oh, there she is. Betsy.
Alan,
Hi.
do you have a second?
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Enchanté.
Enchanté. This is so great. Yeah.
So
Well,
we have a very question here from many people. So I have to ask you right
Okay,
now.
yes,
Everyone
I
is
like-
curious. Let's
I
talk
like-
about Luke. So there are a bunch of questions here. Is he still alive? Did you use his real name in the book? How
Yeah.
did he react to the book? Did he read the book?
Good questions and great questions. And I'm so happy to talk about it. Number one, he is alive. He's 10 years older than I am. I was 20, he was 30, 29. So he is about 75 now. He is alive and living in Brittany, where he was from. He is semi-retired. For a while, we were actually in touch sporadically. Well, as you read in the book, for a good 10, 20 years, every time he came to Boston, I would have a kind of a dinner or a drink with him and try to get some conversation, some closure. I never got anything. And then I finally came to the conclusion that to get him to try to talk about what had happened was like asking him why. Oh, never mind. I don't want, this is a spoiler. Oh, I'm just going to tell you. I don't know what to do. The thing about the blue.
Just go ahead and tell us.
Yeah, you'll still appreciate it, I hope. Blue, this guy, Luke, number one, not his real name. I had to make sure there were no team of lawyers that were going to come after me and tell me that I had to cease and desist and blah, blah, blah. As a matter of fact, for a while, we were Facebook friends, even though we posted nothing. And I knew he was looking at all my stuff. And the reason I know that is that he had no friends on Facebook, but you can always tell when somebody is online, and he was always online. So I knew if you have no Facebook friends and I'm the only one, then you know he's like going back in the years and looking at my stuff. So then as soon as the book was, and I knew he also was looking at my my chamber music website, because he had mentioned some videos he had seen. And since he's such a big music lover, he was interested in following some concerts. But as soon as the book got under contract to be published, I unfriended him and I blocked all contact with him because I was worried. I was worried that there might be some legal issues, because even though I changed his name and I changed the name of the flutist that I mentioned in the first couple chapters, the flute teacher in Nice, I was still worried that that the letters were not mine to use in a book, which is why I had to destroy them and say that I have reconstructed them in my memory. I read each one at least 500 times. So basically they're all in my memory still, even this many years later. So how does he respond? I have not discussed the book with him because we're not in touch anymore. I am wondering, and a lot of people ask me this, do you think he would read it if he knew about it? I am pretty sure he knows about it, because in this day and age, it's pretty hard not to know everything about anybody you're curious about. And because if he goes to my Mistral music website, it's right there on the welcome page. I'm the artistic director and founder, so I have a little thumbnail of the book. I've written a memoir, click here for more information. He must know that it's all about him. And he must be both scared to death to read it, but curious as anything to read it. So I'm sure that he is very torn. Yes, thank you. So there is a website for all things about the book. And I just wanted to mention one more thing about the music, though. If you're the kind of person who does read this online, like either in Kindle or whatever, Kindle or ebook, when you're reading it that way, each piece of music has a little footnote, and all you have to do is actually click on the footnote and it'll bring you to a YouTube performance. And I so urge you to do that, because it adds an entirely another layer of appreciation, because one cannot describe music in words. You can't say this music that we shared, the only person who's ever been able to do that is Proust. And everyone's been talking about it ever since. He's the only one who can describe the inner worlds that music can conjure. So I hope that if you don't read on a Kindle, because I hate that myself, when you get to a piece of music and it says Mahler, for instance, then you just go on to the author site, juliescolnik.com, music in the book, click on that, and all of the pieces will bring you immediately to a YouTube performance. So thank you, Kathleen. Thank you.
Yes, and someone just mentioned that they're reading Proust right now, and in your book you do mention Proust and how you have this sort of Proustian effect that the childhood memories, the memories in general, memories from Paris, music, association with music means so much to you. Maybe you can talk a little more about that, especially this music, right? And all the classical music, which you still associate with Luke, even though you may have broken your heart, right?
Definitely. There's I always think that, so when I introduce a piece to I'm this music series that I run is kind of my magnificent obsession, my love child. It's all besides the book, that's what I do with my life. So I come out and I introduce a piece of music to my audience and explain the first time I heard it, why I fell in love with it. And I often say that, the Madeleine may have done it for Proust. He dunks the Madeleine in tea and all his memories come back. For me, when I hear a piece of music, I remember immediately the first time that I fell in love with it. And it will forever bring back a time and place in my life viscerally. So that Beethoven piece is one of them. it will always be that moment that I sat on the stage and in 1977 and sang that piece. And there were many, many other pieces. I wish it weren't true, to tell you this, or do I not? I don't really mean that I wish it weren't true, because one of the points I try to make in my book is that by the end of the book, and I bring up this Wordsworth poem again, that our memories, people often think that when they have a traumatic experience in their life, they need to delete it, erase it, move on, never think about it again. But even with the pain, and I wouldn't have wanted it any other way. It's what makes up who we are today. It's our life. This line is from Wordsworth. It's our life in food for future years. And I think that's so beautiful, because everybody who has read my book has said that the book brought back personal memories of their own. Everybody said it stirred my own memories, and everybody identifies with a different character. Some people have even said they identified with Luke because they were so stuck and they couldn't give their girlfriend, boyfriend what they needed. And then a grown man, a straight heterosexual grown man in his 50s, said he could not stop sobbing at the end of it because it brought back his last relationship, which was unsettled, and by two countries, two cultures, and that kind of thing. And it, besides the thrill of finally seeing this book in print for me after 45 years of wanting to tell the story, the best part has been that it's resonating with people, and that I get these emails daily from people who say that they loved it. I would have been happy just to see it in print. So this is just really the icing on the cake, that all these years, you have no idea, I was a laughing stock in my family. My kids, when they were little, this book has been like a member of my family. My poor husband, from the first day that I met him, he knew about this book, that I was trying to tell the story. And I kept, and I got plenty of rejections. Remember when I said the book wasn't good enough? It wasn't. And I had 100 of my friends read earlier versions, and they were so wonderful and kind and patient, and they all thought it was a good story, but nobody had the heart to say, I can understand why you haven't gotten it published yet, but I had to fix it. And then, so I was so determined to see this book in print. And that's why this is just enormous for me, and so gratifying, because I knew I had a story and I had to tell it. And I just want to say one more amazing thing. Recently, I came across this line from Maya Angelou, who said, and when people say, why did you have to tell this story? And then now I get to quote her. And her quote was that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. And that was so perfect for me, because that is exactly how I felt.
Absolutely, yes. And so someone is asking here if you ever, well, we have more questions, but one of the question is from Carol again. Do you ever go back to Paris? And sort of to continue this question, mine is, did publishing the book bring you the long sought after resolution of the story, or did it not?
Well, you know what? I think that it definitely helped. I think the point of my book is that I will probably never get total resolution. It made me feel a big sense of closure. And for those of you who, it doesn't matter if you haven't read it, I hope I'm not spoiling anything. But so as I mentioned, I try to get answers from him. I get no answers. And after the very last time that I saw him, I'm driving home in a snowstorm, still not having gotten what I needed from him. I go home, right after playing a job, an opera, I put my flute bag down. I go up into my bedroom, kiss my husband, kiss my children. They were young then, because this isn't recent. This is 20 years or so ago when the book finally ends. And I make some tea, and I bring my tea into the living room. My cat jumps on my lap. I put on some music, and then I open my laptop, and I couldn't stop thinking about this operetta called The Medium, in which this mute servant boy is in love with the woman's daughter that he lives with. The medium's daughter is named Monica. He loves her so much, but he can't express how he loves her. So she goes behind him and she sings a love song to herself as if he's singing it. And he's saying, Monica, Monica, can't you see how my heart is bleeding, bleeding for you? She's singing the song, but it's from him. I'm sorry, that's a very long way to describe what happens. I sit down on my couch and I open up my laptop and I start typing the letter, Dear Julie, and it's from Luke, and it's the letter, it's the words I've been wanting to hear for 25 years about how he's never gotten over me, how he should have run after me when I gave him so many other chances to do so, how every time he hears music come out of his car radio, it's like a knife in his heart because the flute will obsess him to the end of his days. So anyway, I write this letter, and a lot of my readers have said that they did a fist pump because it was so satisfying to get there. So that was a very roundabout way of saying that, yes, I did achieve an enormous amount of closure. And I believe that those memories and the experience of even of the heartbreak will probably always be with me. I mean, that's the point of saying that first love never really goes away. Well, for me, it was the trauma. It's not just the sweetness of first love. It was that it was first love with a very sudden, painful ending. That embedded itself into my heart and soul, which made it so difficult to move on from. But I think anyone who has met my family and my husband and my children and see what a happy life I have been able to create, they know that I have indeed moved on. But, you know, I had to write this book because this story was in there somewhere and I had to get it out to share with the world.
So do you ever go back to Paris?
Yes, yes, I do. And it will always be, you know, I try to create new memories with my husband, and we have, and I've been back alone as well to play concerts. But, you know, to be very, very honest, the old histories, the old memories still arise from the neighborhoods. Paris doesn't look exactly the way it did in 1976. And when I look around at the kids, the students who are there now, I can't get over that. Not only were they not born when I was there, but it was 20 years before they were born. And that part is really hard to wrap my head around. I don't know if, let's see who the women were, Carol and who was the other one? Somebody else, Kristen, I think, I can't remember. But anyway, maybe it was C.S. Smith, that's who it was, who was also in Reed Hall. I mean, I think that it's you know, I'm a very annoying person to travel with for my husband for that reason, because I'm always trying to find a former experience that I had back in those days. And that's not a fun person to travel with. And I try not to do it, but to be very, very honest, it's very hard for me not to remember those things. The Orchestra of Paris chorus doesn't sing in the same place anymore. So that's all different. Otherwise, I might try to show up and relive that experience.
And someone else has John has a question. Tell us more about your connections to Wash, DC and your grandfather's life here.
Oh, yes.
I am from close to the Alban Towers Hotel, but have never been in it.
Joan, nice to meet you. The Alban Towers Hotel, I mean, the Alban Towers is now a set of condominiums in DC. But when I was a little girl, it was a hotel that my Russian immigrant grandfather had bought and turned into a hotel. It was, he had, you know, we had come to this country penniless, sold apples and sheets on the streets of New York, smart business sense, illiterate, could only speak Yiddish and Russian, and bought himself a store, did well, got the first nylon stockings during the war that women would line up for around the block. Front page New York Times article with women showing their nylon stockings. Just a very good businessman. And then he turned that Alban Towers into a hotel where I spent all my childhood vacations. My sisters and I played hide and seek in the lobby, in the stairwells, at the dry cleaner. And they let the three, you know, Revit's granddaughters run freely through its floors. So it was very formative, those memories for me.
Question from Kim. Will you play tonight I'm a
I
flutist as well, she says, and she took a master class with Rampal at Boston University, and she studied in France as well in
wait,
1979, and
I
would
want
love to hear you play.
to see hello. I want to say hi. There, Kim. Hi, Kim. Well, you know what? I just can't do that to you. First of all, music sounds terrible on Zoom. I've tried to play Zoom at like a memorial service for somebody, and it stops and it starts. But I could ask you kindly to go to the Mistral Music YouTube station, Mistral Chamber Music, and you can find literally 50 to 100 videos from our concerts, or you can type in my name on YouTube and you can find a CD that I made with my daughter. You can download anything from iTunes. If you were all here, I'd give you a CD, because these days I'm just giving them away since CDs are becoming obsolete and it's all streaming now. I did a book club recently at the Harvard Club, just yesterday, and I brought party favors and I handed out the CDs. But if you still are a person who has a CD player, you can get these CDs easily from anywhere, Amazon, CD Baby, or I'll send you one. Just let me know.
Thank you all so much for your fabulous questions. It was such a fascinating conversation. And I remind you that the book is available at Politics and Prose and on Amazon. And any questions, you will have Julie's email and you can connect directly with her. And thank you so much, Julie, for spending your time with us tonight.
Appreciate it, Natasha. It was really lovely to meet you all. Thank you for showing your faces. And can I just do it one little self-serving thing? If you like the book, it really helps newbie writers like me if you leave a little rating on either Goodreads or Amazon, because then people see that, obvious reasons. But thank you for that. I'm sorry to ask.
Yes, we will do that. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you
Good
so
evening,
much,
everyone.
I hope I see you again.
Bonsoir.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.